You're about to listen to a BBC podcast, and maybe it's one I had a hand in. I'm Tammy Walker, and I produce podcasts for the BBC. My role is to give new and diverse creators a voice with the opportunity to build a career. That's the thing I love about podcasts. You start with just a good idea, but then you have the space to see where it goes. And doing that at the BBC means we can really run with the best stories while developing the most unique audio talent. So if you like what you hear, why not check out the huge range of podcasts we've got on BBC Sounds?
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello and welcome to the Scottish Football Podcast. I'm Amy Canavan, and as we record, the Premiership table is frozen in time, paused for the winter break. So before the thaw sets in, we're publishing mid-season report cards for all 12 top-flight teams to tell you all you need to know about where they are and how they got there. And this episode is dedicated to the side sitting in 7th place, Dundee.
Great run from Rudden. He's picked out Beck, who scores! Wonderful finish from Owen Beck. Goal! It's a last minute, and I mean last minute, 6 minute of injury time winner for Dundee. The fans are on the pitch. It's absolute mayhem here in Dingwall.
Zach Rudden onto his right foot, has a low shot. Oh, it comes straight to Bakayoko. A brace for the big man.
This is the Scottish Football Podcast.
Joining me to discuss all things Dark Blues is Dundee fan and co-host of the Up Wi the Bonnets podcast, Paul Gray, and former Dundee striker turned BBC Sports Scotland pundit, Rory Loy. How are we, gents?
Very good, very good. Thanks again.
Mate.
Stunning, we're all very good. There's plenty to get through with Rory and Paul, but first let's quickly remind ourselves of Dundee's season so far.
Crosses to the back post, Lyle Cameron! And the local lad equalises with his first Premiership goal.
I think the team are improving every day. I see it in training. I think, in terms of bringing in 12 players, it takes time for them to gel.
McCowan with a chip, oh, it's wonderful! Beautifully judged by Luke McCowan, and Dundee have the goal.
I think it just instills that belief that I've got in them. They need to have that themselves as a group.
Oh, it's a goal! It's an equaliser for St Johnstone. Unbelievable.
Absolutely frustrating. I actually can't believe that I'm having this interview now and through the game, because I felt the manner of the goals we lost, it was a bit of an abdication of responsibility.
James Tavernier, here he goes, right-footed penalty, scores! And it's Dundee 0, Rangers 5.
Another big chance for Dundee. Dens Park's on its feet. Zach Robinson makes it 4. And Dundee are dancing to all 3 points.
I thought it was as close to a complete performance as you could get there. I thought we were really, really dominant. Listen, we're in a good place.
Bakayoko. Little flick to McCowan. Well, it breaks for Robinson, who sticks it in the bottom corner and delivers the biggest of punches to the gut of Motherwell.
Oh, it's scored! Joe Shaughnessy scored! Oh my goodness me! Unbelievable scenes!
Some great moments there, and to summarise the season up to this point for the Dens Park club. Tony Docherty's side are currently 7th in the Premiership with 22 points after 5 wins, 7 draws and 6 defeats. The newly promoted side started the season with a new manager after Docherty was appointed following Gary Boyer's surprise departure. It began in July with disappointment after defeat to Airdrie led them to going out of the League Cup at the group stage. The league season got underway in August with a 1-1 draw at home to Motherwell, and their first Premiership win came at the end of the month with a 1-0 home win over Hearts. To date, only Rangers, Celtic and Hibs have won at Dens. Despite some heavy defeats by the Old Firm, they've produced some memorable results, including a 3-3 draw with Motherwell and a 4-0 win over St Mirren. Right then, Paul, let's get stuck right into this. Where were the expectations at the beginning of the season? You've just appointed a manager who's never been number one in the dugout on your return to the top flight. What were the hopes and dreams?
I think the main thing for Dundee was obviously to remain in the league. I mean, I know there's only 18 matches being played, but I think the main thing for Dundee is to survive. That's and then consolidate and move on, into the next season. But I think I've been very impressed with the way that Dundee have, started the season. I think we've impressed a lot of people. And for me, the main thing is how we've went about our business, just quietly, picking up points here and there, picking up wins here and there, and just really holding our own against well-established Premier League teams.
Now, Rory, you get flung around the country and taken many, many teams for the BBC, and you speak to many people on your travels. Paul says there that he thinks that Dundee will have impressed a lot of people. I agree with that. I imagine you do as well.
Yes, I would absolutely second what Paul's saying there. I think it's a bit of a gripe of mine when teams have been in the top flight 4 or 5 seasons in a row and they go on to say that it's all about survival. I think your ambitions have got to change at some point. However, Dundee, first season back in the league, they've been a bit of a yo-yo club over the last decade or so. I think consolidation is important, but given where they're at now, I don't see any reason why expectations can't change. And based on what I've taken in and seen from Dundee this year, I've watched them win at Livingston, watched them play out a very entertaining 0-0 draw at Easter Road and pick up a couple of other wins. So, look, Dundee are in a good place, a very, very good place for a newly promoted side. And I think they've got a lot of goals throughout the team. I don't think they've got one player who's going to score a barrel load of goals, but I think they've got entertaining players and a very, very good team at their disposal for a newly promoted side. So I've been very, very impressed so far.
Going to get onto the team and the players involved in that, and I'm really looking forward to that section. And I think a lot of people have been impressed by the individual talent in that side, but as you say, Rory, perhaps more collectively, but just still a wee bit on the season so far. Paul, have you allowed yourself for the expectations to be changed? As Rory says there, that survival now, as we've been going through these podcasts, it's we're doing it in order of the league table, and as you can imagine, the lower down we've got, the more podcasts we've got, there's been a little bit less positivity. But despite this being Dundee in 7th, there is still a hell of a lot of positivity due to the games in hand that they still have. Is it now sort of aiming that little bit higher than just staying in the league?
I don't see why not. I mean, personally, obviously, without stating the obvious, there's Dundee have 20 matches still to play. There's loads of football to be played. I think, 7th, 8th would be brilliant, for us to, if we ended the season like that. But with a bit of luck, there's nothing to suggest that we could maybe sneak or creep into that top 6. I mean, there's a lot of similar teams around Dundee, and I think we might have a little bit more than what these teams are currently offering. So why not? Why not aim for top 6? I mean, it could be an aim, and it probably should be. And I think it would be absolutely tremendous for Tony Docherty and the boys if they managed to achieve that. And it would just really lift the supporters even more than what they currently are at the moment.
Rory mentions the win against Livingston, the draw at Easter Road, and that very jam-packed round up. The 4-0 win over St Mirren is certainly the result that stands out. Talk us through, if that is your highlight, what other games, other results, moments have been the highlights of the season so far, Paul?
One of the main highlights was actually getting the first victory of the league season against Hearts. I thought we performed really well, again against a well-established Premier team that they're not frightened to throw a bit of money about. But I thought for me it would be that one. Folk would argue the win at Ross County, the win at Dingwall, the last minute goal from Shaughnessy. But for me, it would have to be nailed on the St Mirren victory. Again, another established team that would, it could have been more. Everything in that game just seemed to click. Me and all the fans that were, interact with the podcast were like, what needs to click with this squad, because we were getting there, but not like to the heights as what we were kind of thinking. But everything in that game just seemed to click perfectly, and like I says, it could have been more.
Rory, just finally, what is the word that sums up this season then for Dundee so far?
If there was one word I would use, I would say entertaining is what I would say. I think Dundee have been up in the Premier League a few times, and don't get me wrong, I joined Dundee previously from Falkirk, and they'd just been promoted, not that season but the previous season, and we had a lot of players in our team who could entertain. Gary Harkins, Greg Stewart, and we finished, Kane Hemmings 8th that season, which was a disappointment. We really should have finished higher up the league with the amount of goals we scored and things like that. And I think the times that Dundee have been in the league since then, I think it's been a bit of a slog. Whereas this year, it doesn't feel like a slog. There's been a lot of entertainment there. You could go through individual players, which I'm sure we'll get to. And I've not watched a Dundee game this season where I've sat there and thought that this game's boring or not worth being at. It's been very good. Even at Livingston, I think as well, control is probably another word I would use in terms of Tony Docherty will want to get away from being Derek McInnes's number 2. I don't think he wants to be associated with Derek McInnes anymore, simply on the basis that he wants to be his own manager. But it's very difficult to describe Tony Docherty's Dundee side this season without using a lot of the words that we'd use to describe a Derek McInnes side. And control, well organised, all these kind of things come into mind. But I think the most positive I could be about them is entertainment. For a team that's just come up, they're worth going to watch, they're worth paying the money for.
They're worth paying your money for, and this podcast is worth lending your ears to. Rory uses the word entertainment, so let's talk about the entertainers in this side. Where to begin? My goodness, Paul, it was a very solid, I think you mentioned it there actually, you said that it was kind of quietly under the radar going about the business, and that was kind of done in the summer. A bunch of very, very solid Scottish Premiership signings were made, weren't they? As well as some flair players, which has always lived in Dundee.
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the main things was getting that spine of the team, with the signing of Carson, Shaughnessy and obviously Lammy on loan. I think they've been integral to how Dundee have, played this season. But then, you've brought in boys like, well, obviously he's left now, but Owen Beck, he just got better and better with each game. And obviously we're gutted to see him go, understandable, but it was tremendous to see him flourish in the dark blue. But I mean, there's other players like, Luke McCowan for me has been an absolute standout. Again, another player that this season he's really took it by the scruff of the neck and he scored some fantastic goals. So yeah, entertaining, I'd completely agree with that, but I would like to see a little bit more, just a wee bit more.
Rightly so, getting the demands, the expectations are high, everything has to raise. Mentions a few names there, there's Paul, Rory, one for me, I think Luke McCowan, he's really managed to make that step up. We watched him in the Championship a lot last season and he was mighty impressive, and it was that question mark, as always, as you say, when players and sides make that leap, can they do it? And he is one that's absolutely taken to it like a duck to water.
Yeah, and sometimes players need a good season at maybe a level below, because there's no doubt he's Premiership quality, but having that full year, playing every week in the Championship, building that confidence. And I know he's not a young player by any stretch, but sometimes players need that. And you often hear the question, what's the difference between the top of the Championship and the bottom half of the Premier League? Luke McCowan, players like Luke McCowan are the difference. If you look at the Championship, Luke McCowan would go in and start in any side in that division. And then if you can, and Owen Beck, for example, as well, unbelievable. People talk about recruitment, unbelievable bit of recruitment. He's going to need to do it again, Tony Docherty, to try and replace him. However, these players are the difference. It's those one or two players. Yes, if you look at defences and players who are going to give you 7 out of 10s every week, there might not be a lot of difference, but it's these playmakers, these players who have positive impacts on the game that are the difference between being a very good Premiership side and being in the Premiership and being in the Championship.
Again, it was I sort of posed it there to Paul that rightly so, your McCowans, Becks, they all sort of grabbed the headlines, but it shows the experience perhaps and why it was a fantastic appointment of Tony Docherty, because he knew he had to get that spine of the team, didn't he? And getting Carson and Shaughnessy in particular, and as you say, Ricky Lammy as well on loan. But that is the experience that you get when you bring in somebody like Tony Docherty. He's managed to really do that well.
Yeah, he has. But, there's also been moments in Dundee season that I look at and think, Paul's talking about wanting a little bit more. It's been there for them. And don't get me wrong, Dundee have scored their fair share of late goals. And I've watched Dundee have a lot of control in matches. But if there was one thing I would say, and, you're never going to know what this comes down to, but they need a little bit more discipline for me in the last 5-10 minutes of games, especially when they're in winning positions. They've dropped 4, 5, 6 points, which if you look at the league table, that's massive. From really comfortable winning positions, if you look at the game in Perth where they're 2-0 up, the game against Motherwell where they go 3-2 up late on. And yes, of course, you could look through and say, they've scored last minute goals as well at Rugby Park last week, for example. But I think if they'd had a little bit more discipline, a little bit more experience, you could argue that in terms of the manager. So there's pros and cons of having Tony Docherty in, but I think long term it's going to be an unbelievable appointment. But I think if they'd shown a little bit more nous in certain games, with the clock ticking down, Dundee could have been in a really, really... You could have been talking sitting in the top 6 with 4 games in hand over some teams, which would be unbelievable. So if they can learn from that in the second half of the season, I see no reason whatsoever why they can't be pushing for top 6.
Is that what you mean by a little bit more, Paul? Or you mean perhaps bodies as well coming in January, or is it just that little bit perhaps more streetwise?
I think Rory's hit the nail on the head there, because that's exactly what I was going to say. The amount of points that we've lost from the winning positions, and the vast majority of Dundee fans always go back to that St Johnstone game where we were coasting, absolutely coasting, and then just lapses in concentration, if you want to call it that. But I think that'll come.
Do you think that's what it is, Paul? Do you think that's what it is, lapses in concentration, or just a bit of inexperience within the squad, or at that level?
I think it could be probably a mixture of both. And, if you look at the Motherwell game, there was, we had a set piece, and you could have just kicked the ball right in at the corner, but they decided to whip the ball in for, like having a chance on goal. What happens? Motherwell go up the pitch. So I think it's a mixture of inexperience and lapses in concentration. But I think as the season goes on, that'll get ironed out. But going back to bodies, I think we could do, with a couple of bodies in, obviously Beck going back, Portales is out, a lengthy injury. So I think we're a bit light in defence. So I think that's going to be, an area to look at. But yeah, goals-wise, like you said, Rory, the goals are coming from kind of all over the pitch. But not a worry, maybe a concern, but strikers aren't getting in about the goals as much as you would probably want. So I think, obviously we brought in the boy Dara Costello, so we'll see what he's like, see what he can bring. But I think, attacking options it will be a priority, and it has to be.
Where did Dundee find this striker that will score them Premiership goals, Rory?
I have no idea, because they're gold dust, aren't they?
Everybody's after one.
Well, exactly, and it's a gem you've got to try and pluck from somewhere. It's very, very unlikely that a club of Dundee's stature is going to be able to sign a well-established striker who's going to score you 20 goals. There's going to be an element of risk to any striker that's signed. You can sign Joe Shaughnessy and Ricky Lamy, for example. They're going to come into Dundee and you know exactly what you're going to get. They're going to be solid. They're going to be good defenders. They're going to defend their own box. I don't think you would have expected the amount of goals Shaughnessy's got right enough, but when it comes to the other end of the pitch, there has to be a degree of gamble, because you simply cannot sign an established forward who's going to guarantee goals in the Premier League. So where that comes from, I'm not quite sure. They plucked Greg Stewart from Cowdenbeath, a fantastic signing. Kane Hemmings came from Cowdenbeath via England as well and scored a barrel load of goals. So sometimes it just takes a wee connection here or there to get somebody in who looks like they could do it. And that, again, for me, is where Tony Docherty comes in. He's been involved in this as a number two for years and years and years, so he knows the little nuances of the transfer market, and that's where Dundee will hopefully flourish when it comes to getting somebody in who can score a few more goals at the top end of the pitch.
You're listening to the Scottish Football Podcast.
Right then, guys, just before we round this up, I think we've kind of touched on it, but we're looking ahead. What are the expectations for the rest of the campaign? As you say, Paul, 20 games left. Coming in, yes, at the start of the season, if I spoke to you 6 months ago, you'd have said, yep, Amy, I'll bite your hand off, it's staying up. But now, where are we aiming? Are we aiming for Europe?
I've joked about that on the podcast, I must admit. But listen, look, I mean, if we were to end the season now, 7th, bite your hand off, take it, absolutely. I think Aberdeen will probably come on, so I think realistically 8th would be brilliant. But like I said to you, I mean, there's still 20 games, a little bit of luck, recruitment's got to be bang on in January. It really has to be to, strengthen the team that, I mean, the team's relatively strong now, but maybe that, like Rory's touched on, a wee gem, that can propel us a wee bit more. So personally, this is me speaking, obviously, I think top 6 is there. It's there for the taking. We just need, like Rory says, just the wee lapses in concentration, get that rid of, and I think we'll be fine. I think potentially top 6.
There for the taking, Rory?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I think you've got to reevaluate expectations. I think when Tony Docherty sat down with John Nelms and Tim Keyes or whoever it would have been at the start of the season, I think expectations would have been survival. I don't think there's anything wrong with looking at it now, and that's not to say if they finish 7th, 8th, 9th, it's been a disappointing season, not at all. But I see no reason whatsoever why Dundee can't get into that top 6. You do need a degree of luck in the Cups as well, but I would love to see, it's been too long since Dundee have went deep into the Scottish Cup, and I would love to see them as well in the second half of the season. As I say, you do need a little bit of luck with the draw, but I would love to see Dundee making a Scottish Cup appearance at Hampden as well.
A wee Scottish Cup appearance at Hampden and a top 6 finish. The boys aren't asking for an awful lot. Rory Loy and Paul Gray, thank you very much for joining us on the Scottish Football Podcast mid-season report card for Dundee, and thank you for listening. And remember, we'll have a very special episode on every Premiership club throughout the winter break, so make sure you follow and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of them. Until next time, bye bye.
Hi, it's Amy Irons here. I just wanted to tell you that Sacked in the Morning is back for a new series. We are your survival guide to football management. If you want to hear exactly what goes on in the dugouts and dressing rooms across the world, then we are the pod for you. And as ever, I'll be joined by former Scotland gaffer Craig Levine and some of football's best managers to provide all the insight you could possibly need. And you can find it on BBC Sounds. Just search for Sacked in the Morning.